My name is Greg and I am a 40-year-old pipefitter working for a large international company in one of their plants in Georgia. I was born in Greenville, South Carolina, where my parents still live today. After I graduated from high school, I enlisted in the U.S. Navy and became a bow mate. I served in the U.S. Navy for 8 years. When I got out, I interviewed for my current job and was hired because of the location of the job. I had to move to Georgia, where I still live. My story with Ginger starts back in Florida, where we met. I was just finishing my first hitch when Ginger said yes. When I asked her to marry me, I was going to get out about 6 months later. And the CMC of my ship called me into his office. This CMC, which is short for Command Master Chief, is a great man that helped guide many sailors in the right direction. He was also a bit disappointed to learn I married Ginger. The subject of the meeting was my plans to be discharged. He told me the Navy had spent a lot of money training me. And as a PO3 is short for Petty Officer, 3rd Class 1 was needed on the ship. He asked me to consider re-enlisting. I did. I also spoke to Ginger and she agreed I should. Ginger was working with the Duval County Social Services Agency at the time. I was later called into the skipper seat cabin and I was asked what my plans were. I said I was re-enlisting by the time my first hitch was up. My ship was in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Italy. The skipper administered my oath. We were on deployment for almost 5 months. I remember being told during that deployment of my pending promotion to PO2, short for Petty Officer, 2nd Class, end of Ginger's pregnancy. When we got back to Mayport, it took a few minutes, but I finally found Ginger with my eyes and see she was in her last trimester later. My CMC remarked that I was lucky because a lot of sailors are on deployment when their kids are born. I will not be deploying for a while. He also wished me well because he was retiring after almost 30 years in the Navy. His replacement was a by-the-book Master Chief who was tough but fair. He met privately with all of the petty officers and told us his expectations of us, and that if we failed to meet those expectations, we would not be petty officers. We had a lot of work to do on the ship. Over the next several months, I was doing some general welding. When my operations officer informed me that Ginger was in labor and to get my butt over to the hospital, it was a long and tough labor. But several hours later, my daughter, Annie, was born. At the time, I was just a dumb sailor. In my early 20s, I had no idea what postpartum depression was. Well, over the coming months, I discovered exactly what it was. I would come home to find Ginger crying. Ginger was not happy. Here, in my opinion, was why I made the worst mistake of my life. I was offered a position working the shore in Norfolk. Normally, a sailor is not offered a position. The Navy just assigns duty based on the needs of the Navy. In this situation, my skipper felt I had the skills needed for that position and could get me there. I declined the offer because I really loved being a blue water Navy man. What made it a mistake was I deployed, leaving a depressed wife. I would call Ginger when I had a chance and we send each other letters. Ginger sent me photos of Annie all the time. However, one day I noticed something odd on one of the envelopes. Ginger has used a pre-printed address label for the return address. It was not the same address as my home was. I knew enough about Jacksonville to know that address was a more upscale part of town. Over the next few days I went through every situation on how such a label could get put on a letter sent to me. You can't spend much time in the Navy to not know who Jody is. One of the chiefs asked me, "Do you want me to tell you the truth or tell you a lie to make you feel better?" He went on to tell me of his wife's affair with her Jody, how he beat the crap out of him and divorced his wife. He then smiled and said, if God wanted a sailor to have a wife, he would issue us one. This chief prepared me for what to expect when we got home. He was laughing a bit when he told me he had been in the Navy for almost 18 years. By then, the first thing you do when you get home is look in the trash can outside. look for old sale circulars and take a close look at the effective dates. I asked why. The chief said if Ginger is living with Jody, she comes home from time to get the mail. Sometimes people just leave things like sale circulars on the table or on a piece of furniture. Then he said, check bank records for large store purchases in the days leading up to the homecoming. He then said, do a good careful inspection of the kitchen. Look into the fridge for very recently purchased things. Also look for out-of-date things. Do the same thing in your canned goods storage areas. The point being, most likely Ginger won't be able to think of everything. He said that label means nothing without some other proof. Do not confront her because I could get into serious trouble with the old man. If I did as it would happen, I told Ginger, I needed to go to town for a few minutes. About 10 a.m. that next morning I went directly to my bank and got a printout of all debit card transactions. There was one large ACH debit for close to $150. 2 days before I got home at a local grocery store, I folded up that printout and went home. I could not remember the days we got trash picked up. So I went out and looked in my trash can. That old salty chief knew what he was talking about. I saw sale circulars in that trash can from months ago. I was standing at the trash can almost in tears. When I heard the back door open and saw Ginger, I did not say a word. I walked past her back into my bedroom and got some of my things together. Ginger was all over me trying to stop me. I asked Ginger when the last time she bought groceries. She said about a week ago. I did go get some items the other day when I said you bought almost $150 worth that day. She just sat on the bed and started to cry. Then I walked over to my shaving kit and grabbed that letter she sent me. I would not let her hold it, but I showed it to her. Ginger started crying harder to her credit. She did not insult my intelligence by saying things like I don't understand or that other garbage. She just said, I am sorry, please don't end us over this. I looked at her and said, Ginger, you should have thought about this before you started screwing Jody. I slept that night on the ship. In fact, I was berthed in that ship for the next year. I had Ginger served at work to her credit. She did not fight me or seek anything but reasonable child support. We did not own any property. So the actual settlement was easy. I did pay for her attorney. I then requested a transfer to Norfolk and it was granted. I told Annie bye, drove up to Norfolk and reported in. I never deployed again. By this time, Annie was almost preschool age. Ginger moved back in with her parents and kept her job to this day, is still there. Her Jody got tired of her, I guess. Then I started getting reports that Ginger was putting Annie at risk. I always got along with Ginger's dad. In fact, when he got in touch with me was when I decided to go see what the hell was going on. I also hired a private investigator to follow Ginger. Her dad was almost crying the day we talked. He loved his daughter and he especially loved that granddaughter. And I knew I was the only one that had a reasonable chance in court. I discovered Ginger was working at a nightclub basically to help pay for her drug use. So I hired an attorney and we got an emergency hearing. The judge gave Ginger a choice to get help or lose custody of Annie. What I was wanting was for her parents to take custody. I also started paying my child support to them later. Ginger walked out of the facility and just disappeared for a long time to this day. Her parents and I have no idea where. Then one day out of the blue, she is back home and was fighting her dad for Annie. The cops got called and thankfully, the cop that answered the call had some wisdom. He told Ginger she had to leave or go to jail. That was the day I left Norfolk, got Annie and brought her back with me. I was told to bring Annie back to Florida. About a month later, by this time, I was very close to my discharge. The judge gave me 100% custody of Annie and Ginger was only allowed to visit when her parents were there to supervise. Annie is now a teenager and looks just like her mother. She still spends several weeks during the summer in Florida with her grandparents. Ginger still is not allowed unsupervised visits. Her relationship with her parents is not good. Her dad has taken her to the hospital many times over the years. She did get her job back with Duval County. But honestly, I am surprised she still has it. I never knew who Jody was. I never cared. I do know if I ever do find out he might not like what happens. Last time I saw Ginger, her hair was colored pink and she has a nose ring and is covered with tats. She has a lot of feminist garbage on her car. I am also saving money for Annie's education several years ago. I met Debbie and I do not live together. Annie really does not have much of a relationship with Ginger. Debbie has been a godsend. Debbie takes her shopping, takes her to places to do things like get her nails done in general. Female things I could never do. Debbie and I both survived a bad marriage and are not looking to remarry. Debbie is also teaching Annie how to cook. Life is good for those of you that don't know. The term Jody was used back in the day in the military for a man who was stealing soldiers,